When did your "something is very wrong here" feeling turn out to be true? Airline pilot here. Heads up, if flying makes you uneasy, you might want to skip this one. We had just finished boarding passengers' cargo. Everything was loaded, and we were ready to taxi out. But as we sat there, I noticed something odd. The nose of the aircraft seemed higher off the ground than usual. Not dramatically so, but just enough to make me pause. I mentioned it to my first officer, and he agreed it didn't look quite right. We double-checked the weight and balance numbers. Everything looked correct on paper. Still, I wasn't convinced. I figured maybe the struts would settle during taxi and things would return to normal. So we started taxiing, but nothing changed. That nagging feeling in my gut just got stronger. I called ground control and requested to return to the gate. Then I contacted operations and told them I suspected an issue with the aircraft's weight and balance. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Once we were back at the gate, I specifically asked them to verify the ballast on board. According to my load sheet, we were supposed to have 500 pounds of ballast to help maintain proper center of gravity. But I had a hunch. Sure enough, they had forgotten to load the ballast. Had we taken off like that, the aircraft's center of gravity would have been dangerously out of limits, so far off, in fact, that it could have made the plane uncontrollable. This kind of imbalance has led to tragic outcomes in the past, like that well-known 747 incident where the cargo shifted and the aircraft couldn't be saved. That day, I was incredibly grateful for my years of flying experience. It was just a subtle feeling, but it likely saved my life and the lives of everyone on board. The bass thumped through the crowded college apartment, the air thick with the mingled scents of cheap beer and sweat. It must have been sophomore year. Two guys, clearly older and out of place amidst the boisterous students, materialized near the kitchen. An unsettling stillness clung to them. They were islands in the sea of drunken revelry, their faces devoid of smiles, their interactions minimal. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. Later, the murmur rippled through the throng. Accusations, hushed and then louder. Someone had spotted them, hands lingering too long near back pockets. The confrontation was swift, ugly. A shout, a flinch, and then the glint of metal in the dim light. A small knife flashed, plunging into a kid's stomach. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The two men moved with a chilling lack of urgency, threading their way through the stunned crowd and out the door as if they were simply leaving a dull lecture. They vanished into the night, leaving behind a scene that felt ripped from a bad dream. The surreal quality of it all, the casual violence amidst the drunken chaos, lingered long after they were gone. Miraculously, the kid who was stabbed recovered fully, a strange footnote to a bizarre and disturbing night. The invitation to join a weekend trip with a local scouting area in the 80s had been last minute. Keen for some climbing, canoeing, and caving in the Peak District, I signed up even though I didn't know everyone going. We were a mixed bunch, thrown together to fill the numbers. The rented house in the Peak District felt remote, tucked away down winding country lanes, a different era before the ease of sat-nav and mobile phones. One evening, a small group decided to try some bouldering. They headed out to a nearby spot with gritstone boulders that loomed surprisingly high, easily 10 to 15 meters. When I saw the exposed rock faces, a knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. Without ropes or gear, I questioned. That's a fatal fall waiting to happen. My caution earned me the predictable taunts of chicken. Uncomfortable with the risk they were so casually embracing, I decided to walk back to the house, leaving them to their reckless pursuit. An hour later, the unimaginable happened. A frantic knock on the door, a pale face illuminated by the porch light, delivered the horrifying news. One of the lads had fallen 10 meters. The sickening thud of his head hitting the rocks had been final. Instant death. The rest of the weekend was a blur of shock and grief. The carefree camaraderie had been shattered by a stark and brutal reality. As the years passed, the memory of that trip remained a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the wisdom of trusting one's instincts. I never saw most of that group again, our paths diverging after that tragic weekend. The location of the house, once difficult to find, became lost in the fog of memory, though I vaguely recall walking down to Castleton after returning to the house that night. I wasn't called to any inquest, remaining an outsider to their close-knit circle, forever connected by a shared, devastating experience. A palpable fear had gripped South Carolina a couple of years back. A serial killer was on the loose, his face unknown, but the body count was already at 3. My granny, a woman of the earth who'd never seen the inside of a classroom but possessed a sharp, homespun intelligence, lived alone at the end of a long, isolated dirt road. 10 other families dotted the lane, but her nearest neighbor was a good quarter of a mile away. One ordinary afternoon, a stranger's knock echoed through her quiet house. Granny, ever cautious, approached her glass front door, but didn't open it. A man in his 40s stood there, a flimsy story about a broken-down car tumbling from his lips, requesting to use her phone. Something about him didn't sit right with her. Common sense, honed by years of rural living, screamed a warning. Anyone visiting the handful of families on that dead-end road would have stopped at closer house. He had no reason to be at her doorstep. No, she stated firmly through the glass, her eyes unwavering. You need to leave. As she backed away, her hand instinctively reached for my pawpaw's old .410 shotgun, a familiar weight offering a sense of security. The moment the man saw the barrel of the gun, his demeanor shifted. He turned and fled, disappearing as quickly as he'd arrived. About a week later, the news crackled with the announcement of the serial killer's capture. The mugshot flashed across the screen, and a cold dread washed over me. It was him, the same unsettling stranger who had stood on my granny's porch that afternoon. Her intuition, that quiet wisdom born of a life lived close to the land, had likely saved her life. Growing up in bear country, I learned the distinct scent of a black bear early on, a wild, musky odor that, while sharing a certain pungency with a skunk, possessed a more pervasive quality, hanging heavy in the air. One afternoon, leaving my friend's house just a stone's throw away, that familiar aroma struck me. There's a bear around, I announced with the unwavering certainty of a child who knew their surroundings. My friend's mom, however, offered a dismissive smile. Probably just a skunk, honey. Despite my attempts to explain the difference, a skunk's sharp spray versus a bear's lingering musk, she remained unconvinced. Feeling uneasy, I asked if she could drive me the short distance home, a request she granted with a touch of playful exasperation. As her car pulled up to my house, the validity of my childish pronouncement became undeniably clear. A black bear, substantial and undeniably real, was perched on our back steps, directly in front of the door I would have used. While black bears are generally not aggressive, encountering one unexpectedly at that age could have been quite a shock. My friend's mom's eyes widened in disbelief, her earlier skepticism instantly replaced with apology. "Oh, wow," she murmured, shaking her head. "You were absolutely right. I'm so sorry I doubted you. You could have walked right into that." The brief car ride, born of a child's intuition, had unknowingly averted a potentially startling encounter. This happened nearly 30 years ago, but the memory is still crystal clear. I was around 8 or 9 years old, out buying candy for the weekend with the girl who lived next door. She was a year younger than me. As we walked out of the store, a car pulled up beside us. The driver opened the passenger door and told us to get in. He said he was there to pick us up for our parents. Immediately, something fell off. A cold, uneasy feeling crept over me, and I suddenly remembered the warnings my parents had given me. This is what they meant, I thought. Without hesitating, I grabbed my friend's hand and pointed to a nearby house, telling the man we lived right over there. Then I pulled her with me, walked straight up to the door, rang the bell, and when the residents answered, I quickly explained what had just happened. It turned out my instincts were right. We had narrowly escaped a kidnapping. This wasn't one of those something felt seriously wrong moments, but more of a quiet gut feeling. I was around 20, and a bunch of my friends were heading to this party. Everyone was hyped, but I just wasn't feeling it. I couldn't explain why. I just had this nagging sense like I really don't want to be around those people in that place tonight. So I passed. Stayed home. Later that night, things went sideways fast. Two of my friends got into an argument with the people hosting the party, got kicked out, and, despite being absolutely hammered, decided to drive home. Angry. Drunk. Not a great combo. They ended up flipping the car 3 or 4 times and smashed into several others. Total chaos. One of them walked away with a mild concussion. The other, 8 broken bones and 2 years of walking therapy. When emergency responders arrived, they told them point blank, if anyone had been in the back seat, they wouldn't have made it. That's exactly where I would have been sitting. Sometimes it's not a dramatic warning or obvious red flag, just a quiet nah that ends up saving your life. I work at a psychiatric hospital. One day I was in the cafe with patients from the adult unit, and the adolescent unit was there at the same time. I recognized one of the girls from when she was on the children's unit. We'd always had a good rapport, so I went over to say hi. I told her I was proud of her for staying out of trouble. But as soon as I said it, the vibe shifted. A few of the other girls gave each other strange looks, and the girl I knew suddenly looked guilty, like I'd just outed something she wasn't ready for. It was subtle, but it hit me wrong. I walked over to the staff assigned to the adolescent unit and told them something felt off. I didn't have proof, but I told them they might want to keep an extra eye on that group of girls. Like I was screaming that something was up. They kind of brushed me off. Less than 30 minutes later, 4 of the girls, including the one I'd spoken to, violently attacked 2 staff members. One had her head bashed in and suffered permanent brain trauma. The other lost sight in one eye. I'll never forget how fast it all happened, or how right that gut feeling was. My grandparents were driving up a steep mountain road, following closely behind a logging truck loaded with massive trees. Partway up the incline, my grandmother suddenly started to panic. It wasn't like her. She wasn't dramatic or anxious by nature, but she kept repeating, "Something's not right. We need to pull over. Please, pull over." My grandfather listened. He eased the car onto the shoulder and helped calm her down. After a few minutes, she was back to normal. No clear explanation, just a lingering sense of unease that had suddenly lifted. They continued on their way. A mile or 2 up the road, they found the logging truck. Its load had come loose and spilled across the highway. Huge logs scattered where their car would have been if they hadn't stopped. Her gut feeling probably saved both their lives. It was 1:30 in the morning, raining steadily, and I was riding my motorcycle down a 4-lane road, 2 lanes in each direction with a center turn lane. As I cruised along at about 45 miles per hour, I noticed a car creeping up to a stop sign from a bar parking lot, perpendicular to my path. Instantly, a thought hit me. He's going to turn left right in front of me. I eased off the throttle. I was still about 200 to 250 feet away when, sure enough, he pulled right out in front of me. I grabbed both front and rear brakes. The back tire locked up and fishtailed hard to the left. Now, I had maybe 40 or 50 feet to make a split-second decision. Either high side and risk getting run over, slam directly into his driver's side, or bail. I chose to jump. I launched myself off the right side of the bike in a tuck and roll, just as my motorcycle slammed into the rear driver's side of the car. I walked away with some scratches, bruises, and a sore tailbone. But I wasn't lying in the road under a car, and I wasn't halfway through his back seat window. Sometimes you just gotta thank your gut, or in this case, your spidey sense. A former co-worker of mine, Jason, once told me a story that stuck with me ever since. Years ago, he was working as a senior cargo agent at a major shipping port in China. His job was to verify and inspect cargo containers as they were unloaded from massive international freighters. A typhoon had just passed through, and as a result, dozens of ships had been delayed. Once the skies cleared, chaos followed. There was a massive backlog, and another storm was already on the way. Everyone on the docks was scrambling to unload 3 times the normal volume in half the time. Jason, like everyone else, had a radio. At one point, he heard a dock manager losing it over the comms. A ship had been unloaded, but was still sitting docked, unable to leave because no cargo agent had verified the delivery. Jason tried radioing the assigned cargo agents. First one, then another. No response. He finally called in another senior agent to check it out. 30 minutes later, the ship was still there. Jason again radioed the agent he had sent. Nothing. Even the dock manager, who'd been shouting over the radio just moments earlier, had gone silent. Jason, now the only senior cargo agent nearby, had no choice but to head to the site himself. But as he got in his truck, a wave of dread washed over him. Something didn't feel right. He tried again to reach anyone by radio. Silence. Still, he drove over. When he arrived at the unloading zone, something stopped him cold. He said it felt like an invisible force was holding him back, physically pressing him into his seat. His hand shook as he picked up the radio and broadcast. Unknown threat near unloading section 4. All workers evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. With that single transmission, an entire multi-billion-dollar port came to a halt. A hazmat team was dispatched. They found that a shipping container, damaged during the typhoon, had been leaking a heavy, inert gas. It had pooled in the narrow corridors between the stacked containers, silently displacing the oxygen. Anyone who walked into that pocket lost consciousness within seconds. 5 people died, including the senior agent Jason had sent in. Though Jason's broadcast likely saved dozens of lives, he was fired. He didn't have the authority to shut down the port. He tried filing the Chinese equivalent of a wrongful termination suit, but was pressured to settle. As a foreigner, he was warned the government might decide he was partially liable for the deaths. He took a modest settlement and quietly gave the entire sum to the widow of the agent who had died. Jason still blames himself. I used to work as a lifeguard in a small, gated community that catered to a lot of wealthy families. I also sang at the local church services, which is how I came to know the pastor. From the moment I met him, something just felt off. I couldn't pinpoint it. He was polite, even friendly, but every time I spoke to him, my stomach dropped. I just didn't like being around him. A while later, I started noticing him at the community pool. A lot. He wasn't there to swim. He was just hanging around, always watching the kids. One little boy in particular got his attention. The pastor would have a towel ready for him, and he'd help him dry off, often having the boy sit on his lap. It didn't look right. It didn't feel right. As far as I knew, he wasn't a relative or a babysitter. He was just there, showing an unusual amount of attention to this one child. The way he interacted with the boy made my skin crawl. I finally decided to say something. I approached the boy's parents and told them that the pastor's behavior around their son made me uncomfortable. To their credit, they took it seriously and looked into it. Not long after, they quietly told me they had found out the pastor had been going to their home when they weren't there, spending time with their son alone in his bedroom. They didn't give me the full details, but it was clear from what they did say that something sexual had likely occurred. He was removed from the church shortly afterward. I don't know what happened to him after that, but I do know this. When your gut is telling you something is wrong, listen. It might just protect someone who can't protect themselves. While working at a research institute, I stepped into a mouse procedure room just for a moment to grab something. Almost immediately after walking out, I started to feel a little off, lightheaded, almost like I was slightly high. It struck me as strange, especially since there were 3 people still working in that room, including 2 undergraduate students. Concerned, I went back in to check on them. I asked if everyone was feeling okay. One of the undergrads turned to me and said she was fine, but her face was flushed and she clearly looked disoriented. That's when I started inspecting the isoflurane chambers. These contain a volatile, odorless anesthetic that can knock out mammals at low concentrations and become lethal at higher ones. Sure enough, I found the issue. The gasket on one of the chambers had failed. Isoflurane was leaking out, immediately vaporizing into gas and quietly filling the room. I told them what was happening. The postdoc brushed me off, insisting everything was fine. He said he used that setup all the time and pointed out that the isoflurane was being used inside a biosafety cabinet, which he believed provided adequate protection. That's when I told him he was wrong, and frankly, an idiot. A biosafety cabinet recirculates air to protect samples. It doesn't evacuate airborne chemicals like a fume hood does. It was absolutely the wrong equipment for volatile anesthetics. Ignoring his protests, I propped open the door and ordered the undergrads to get out of the room immediately. Then I went straight to their lab manager and explained everything I'd just witnessed. She responded with the fury of a storm, and rightly so. After my mother passed away, my father began dating a woman not long after, someone I later discovered he'd likely been seeing before my mother's death. I liked her at first. One evening, my father took me aside and asked how I'd feel if he proposed to her. I felt an awful sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, and I felt physically sick. I told my father that I didn't want him to marry her. He seemed confused, thinking I liked her, and asked me why. I explained that while I did like her, I had this bad feeling. He dismissed it, saying, "That's just a feeling. It doesn't mean anything." He already had the ring and proposed to her shortly after. Despite my reservations, I found myself getting excited about the wedding, the move to a new house, and the idea of a little sister on the way. But after the wedding, things changed. Once my half-sister was born, her behavior became downright erratic. She started abusing me, my full sister, my mother's child, and eventually my half-sister as well. My father never believed me when I tried to get help, and he insisted I was lying about everything. I had to eat food with a substance I'm intolerant to because she would put it in my meals, and he wouldn't listen when I tried to explain. The situation didn't improve until my doctor told my father that something was seriously affecting my health. It wasn't until my maternal grandmother told him she would pursue custody that he finally left her. He had accused me of lying about everything up until that point, and even after the situation ended, he never checked in on me or asked about the help I had tried to get. For context, I was 8 when my mother passed away, 10 when my father married her, and 12 when we finally left. My little sister was only 3 when her mother died. My mother had passed away from an aneurysm. She survived the first one, but didn't make it through the second while in the hospital. Today, my half-sister is at university studying medicine. There were times when social services were involved, but they only made things worse. I didn't get counseling until she turned 18, as I didn't want to subject her to more intervention that could cause further harm. The access case, where the stepmother told my toddler half-sister that if she spent the night at our house, her stepmother would die, ultimately resulted in her stopping visits altogether. My stepmother even accused me of abusing my half-sister during the access case, which was the farthest thing from the truth. I was terrified of her and avoided her whenever possible. For instance, once when I smiled at the baby, my stepmother freaked out, accusing me of having an evil smile, picked up my half-sister, and fled the room. I don't know if my half-sister would be open to a relationship with me now, or even if she remembers all of it. After my father left his second wife, he married again, though she's now past reproductive age, and I'm unsure if she has children from a previous relationship. 9 years ago, I gave my father a letter telling him I would have no contact with him until he put in writing that he would never use violence or threats against me again. I'm still waiting for that acknowledgement. Abusers often come across as incredibly charming. They wouldn't be able to manipulate people into abusive situations otherwise. They can maintain a perfect facade for social services, teachers, coworkers, and others, making it difficult for anyone to see their true nature. I would call my father a lot of things, but he lacks the depth, warmth, and capacity to truly be the person I wish he could have been. The most vivid memory I have is from about 10 years ago. I was a groomsman at a friend's wedding, and everything was going smoothly until, out of nowhere, I was hit with a sudden sense of impending doom. Oh no! They're going to play the chicken dance next. Panic set in, and I immediately started frantically looking for someone, shouting, "Who wants to go smoke? Let's go smoke." Now, the funny thing is I don't even smoke, but somehow I managed to rally a group of people to join me. When we finally came back, sure enough, the chicken dance was in full swing. And I, somehow, was the only one in the wedding party who had managed to avoid its embarrassing clutches. I got off the subway late one night, and there was just one other person a little ways behind me on my walk home. It's a totally normal situation, has happened countless times before. The guy looked completely unremarkable, wasn't following me closely or acting strange. But for some reason, I had an uneasy feeling in my gut. The feeling was so strong that when I turned the corner on my way home, I suddenly broke into a full sprint and ducked behind a dumpster in the shadows halfway down the block. I stayed as still as I could, watching him from my hiding spot. Sure enough, when he came around the corner and saw I wasn't there, I knew I had made the right choice. He started looking for me, muttering to himself, checking down the street, peeking around corners. I held my breath and stayed completely silent, praying he wouldn't spot me. It felt like forever, but eventually he gave up and disappeared. Looking back, I'm so grateful I listened to that strange, gut-wrenching instinct to hide. It saved me. When my sister was 18, she bought a horse from a guy who was 47 and married. My parents liked him and ended up becoming friends with him and his wife. But I knew something didn't feel right because he and my sister would talk on the phone constantly. My mom even asked his wife if she was okay with it, and she said it was fine, that he did this often with other kids who needed horse advice. Yeah. My parents eventually wanted to send my sister to stay with him for the whole summer to ride and show horses. I told them the relationship was clearly inappropriate, but they didn't listen. They kept saying, if the wife's okay with it, what's the big deal? 2 months later, he left his wife. 4 months after that, they were engaged. Another 4 months, and they were married. Just 1 week later, my sister was pregnant. This guy has a history of parents accusing him of making advances on their underage daughters. His own son has cut ties with him. And the kicker? He's not even good-looking or rich, just a gross, leathery-skinned, three-toothed hillbilly. Well done, baby sis. 2 years ago, the familiar rhythm of my bike ride home took an unsettling turn as I approached the bridge. A girl stood weeping on one side, her distress palpable. On the bridge itself, two figures, clearly young teenagers around 14, one noticeably taller than the other, were locked in a tense standoff, heads close, the air thick with unspoken conflict. As I cycled past, they momentarily broke apart. A nagging feeling prickled at the back of my mind, a sense that something was deeply wrong. Yet, I reasoned with myself. Teenage squabbles, likely over a girlfriend, were commonplace, surely not a cause for alarm. I pedaled on. Only minutes later, the devastating truth emerged. The taller of the two boys, driven to the edge, had jumped from the bridge in a desperate act of suicide. His smaller friend, physically outmatched, had been unable to prevent the unthinkable. The weight of what if settled heavily upon me. Had I stopped, had I heeded that insistent gut feeling, could I have intervened? Could my presence, a listening ear, have made a difference in those final, agonizing moments? Edit. The subsequent details painted a heartbreaking picture. The boy had been tormented by bullies and faced a difficult home life. His two friends, the girl and the smaller boy, were his sole support. He had confided in them his suicidal thoughts, and they had desperately tried to dissuade him on the bridge. In a tragic twist, they had even called the police, requesting they arrive without sirens. They had managed to pull him back from the edge, but the blaring sirens of the arriving police car triggered a final, fatal flight. He broke free from his friends and leaped headfirst. While I don't hold myself responsible for this tragedy, the what-ifs still echo in my thoughts, a haunting reminder of a moment where a fleeting encounter intersected with profound despair. When I was younger, we often visited my aunt. Her brother-in-law was usually there, sometimes babysitting her kids. My sister and I never liked him. We told our mom he made us uncomfortable and that we didn't want to be around him, even though he'd never said or done anything directly to us. Years later, the truth came out. Not only had he been sexually abusing his teenage daughter, but he and his girlfriend had also been raping my infant cousin and taking photos of the abuse. Now, he's in prison for a very, very long time. This didn't happen to me, but to my coworker. Last week, she got a call saying her sister-in-law, Sale, hadn't shown up for work. No call, no explanation. The SGL had been working 3 jobs and was exhausted, complaining about needing a good night's sleep. My coworker figured she'd just slept through her alarm, but her husband insisted she go check on her. It's not like her to just not show up, he said. Annoyed but obliging, my coworker drove the 20 minutes to her SGL's place. When she arrived, she found her sister-in-law unconscious. She had overdosed on opioids and suffered a heart attack. Her oxygen levels were dangerously low. The paramedics later said that if my coworker hadn't arrived when she did, her SGL would have been dead within minutes. Always trust your gut. Update: Monday, this happened last Wednesday. Today, they finally moved her out of the ICU and into a regular room. Her heart and liver were severely damaged, but they're slowly improving. She underwent dialysis yesterday, which helped significantly. On Saturday, doctors tried to get her to stand and walk to a chair, but it didn't go well, and they haven't attempted it again yet. Miraculously, she doesn't seem to have any major brain damage, just slightly slower speech. Still, doctors were concerned because nobody knows exactly how long her oxygen levels were critically low. Once she's discharged, she'll go to rehab, even though my coworker and her family believe this was a one-time mistake. Luckily, she lives on the first floor of my coworker's house, so if there are any long-term effects, she'll have family nearby to support her. My mom has been a psychiatric nurse for over 30 years, working at a private hospital. One of the patients she was looking after was a woman in her 40s, very loud and boisterous, who had been there for over a week. One night, my mom noticed this woman was acting unusually lethargic. She claimed to just be feeling tired and said she was going to bed early and wanted her meds earlier than usual. It seemed odd to my mom, but she figured everyone has their off days, so she gave her the medication and let her rest. About 5 minutes later, my mom still felt uneasy about the situation, so she decided to check on the woman's stats. When she walked into the room, the patient was just about to lie down. Mom decided to take her blood pressure, pulse, and oxygen saturation levels. In a psychiatric hospital, this isn't typically done unless there are other health concerns, but something told her it was important. The oxygen saturation was alarmingly low, around 80%, I think. It's hard to recall exactly. To put that into perspective, anything below 92% can prevent your cells from absorbing enough oxygen, potentially causing permanent damage. In all her years of nursing, my mom had never seen such a low reading. She checked again, and it was still dangerously low. Without hesitation, she called an ambulance and got the woman on oxygen right away. Later that night, my mom received a call from the hospital where the patient had been taken. The doctor told her the woman had a blood clot, and if she had been left for just 15 more minutes, the doctor was certain she would have died. Thankfully, the woman made a full recovery, and the next time she saw my mom, she gave her a beautiful scarf as a token of her appreciation. One day, when I was probably about 13, a man showed up at our door looking for my mom. The moment I saw him, a wave of unease hit me, and I instinctively stepped back, hiding most of my body behind the door, ready to slam it shut. There was just something about him that didn't sit right. He told me he hadn't seen my mom in a long time and that he had just come from church and was in the neighborhood. He was trying to come across as a good guy, but something about his smile and the way he acted made me trust him even less. I told him my mom was napping, even though she wasn't. She was actually at work. He left a note with his name and number, saying he'd like to catch up with her. I took the note and quickly shut and locked the door. But as soon as I looked at the note, everything froze. The name on it, I recognized it immediately. It was my uncle. The same uncle I hadn't seen since I was 5, when he went to jail for murdering my aunt and cousin. A few years ago, on Thanksgiving, my mom was completely overwhelmed. Holidays were never easy for my family, and the tension between my parents always made things worse. They had communication issues that led to stressful, uncomfortable dinners, and if it wasn't them arguing, it was someone else causing drama. That particular year, everything was especially bad. My mom had been cooking for hours, getting ready to head over to my cousin's house. Meanwhile, my dad was yelling about how much money we spent on the holidays. It escalated to the point where my mom told me and my brothers to leave for the party without them. We hadn't even gotten far from the house when this awful feeling settled in my stomach. I knew my brothers felt it too. I said, "Can we go back?" And my older brother turned around without hesitation. When we got home, my dad was gone. He had left in anger after my mom told him to leave. We found her in her bed, lying still with an empty bottle of sleeping pills beside her. She was still conscious when we walked in, but was starting to shake and drifting off. We called 911 immediately. I later learned that the pills she had taken wouldn't have killed her. They would have only made her sleep for a long time, but clearly it was her way of escaping. She had been struggling with severe depression for years, and after that night, she finally got the real help she needed. I attended a Catholic grade school in the 1970s and 80s. There was a priest everyone adored, charismatic, warm, and unusually friendly with students. He'd often join the basketball team for pickup games after school, laughing and high-fiving like one of the guys. One evening after a game, he invited a few of us 8th graders back to the rectory. Inside, he cracked open beers, swore casually, and joked around like we were his buddies. "Don't tell anyone about this," he said with a wink. Even at 13, I knew this was wrong. A priest drinking with kids, asking for secrecy. But who would believe us? He was beloved. Years later, the truth surfaced. He'd been systematically raping altar boys. The church knew. They covered it up, moving him from parish to parish. When the scandal finally exploded, he fled to Mexico and took his own life. That fun night in the rectory wasn't just inappropriate, it was grooming. And the church let it happen. I went on a high school field trip for a couple of days, and on the first day, we had a barbecue. There was chicken, but I didn't trust the other kids to make sure it was cooked properly, so I decided to skip it. The next day, 15 people came down with salmonella, which ended up ruining their whole trip. Guess that was more logic than instinct at the time. A couple of years ago, we had a young dog, about a year and a half old, who had epilepsy. We had to give him medication multiple times a day to manage it. One day, he suddenly stopped eating. After a day or two, I told my parents we should take him to the vet, but they brushed it off with "he'll get over it." A week later, he was still refusing to eat, so we finally took him in for a routine checkup. Turns out, he had liver failure, which was almost certain to progress into heart failure. A few days later, we made the heartbreaking decision to put him down, not wanting him to suffer. I told you, Mom. Back in freshman year, there was this really attractive girl who would constantly stare at me in the dining hall. But something about her just gave off this crazy vibe. Now, as a senior, I find out that my buddy hooked up with her for about a month. The weird part? She still randomly shows up at his apartment and crashes on their couch, even though he's told her more than once that he doesn't want anything to do with her. This wasn't exactly a bad feeling, but it felt like the right story to share. I was a freshman in high school, trying out for football for the first time, pretty average, maybe a little on the scrawny side. About 2 weeks into practice, I started getting awful back pain. I told my mom, and she brushed it off, saying, "You're just sore, suck it up." So I did. I kept pushing through practice for another week, but eventually I had to tell my mom that either she takes me to the hospital or I'd go on my own. So she set up an appointment, and it turns out I had a small fracture in one of my vertebrae, tiny cracks on both sides of the same one. Safe to say, I don't exactly take her advice much anymore. Pretty simple one. I went to a party that was packed from the moment I walked in, shoulder to shoulder. I could barely move through the house, and people were spilling out onto the lawn, acting like fools. It was way too crowded, and I could already tell things were about to go downhill fast. So I grabbed my friend and we bounced. As we were leaving, about 10 to 12 police units passed us on the road, heading straight for the party. City, county, and state cops, small town, so they probably called for backup. I found out later that the party got shut down, obviously. The cops painstakingly ID'd everyone there, arrested the people who threw the party for underage drinking, arrested all the underage people, found a ton of drugs, and made more arrests for that. They also ended up towing a bunch of cars because nobody was sober enough to drive, and even the people who were fine to leave were stuck there for hours. We just went to a bar and drank like normal adults. We were at a house party when my friend introduced his new coworker. From the moment this guy walked in, something fell off. His energy screamed unhinged. As the night went on, he spiraled into racist rants and wild conspiracy theories, muttering about prophecies with unsettling conviction. I pulled my friend aside the next day, cut ties with him. That guy's a walking red flag. 2 months later, he murdered his girlfriend, who'd also been at that party, slitting her throat in broad daylight. When bystanders tried to stop him from killing himself, he turned the knife on his own neck. Last I heard, he was behind bars. But I'll never forget how obvious the danger was that night, how the room laughed off his eccentricities while my stomach twisted. One day, my oldest daughter, in her 30s, stopped by my work to introduce her new boyfriend. He seemed a little off to me, but I figured it was just a guy dating my daughter thing, so I didn't think much of it. Later, he met my wife and she mentioned that he seemed off to her too. She has pretty good instincts about people, so we decided to look into him a bit. We Googled his full name, and the first result was a mug shot from a couple of years ago. The third result was an active warrant for his arrest. More searching uncovered 3 warrants from different counties, a long criminal record, including charges for deception, theft, driving with a suspended license, driving after a lifetime suspension, and driving as a habitual traffic offender, and a brand new marriage license for him and my daughter. They were set to get married later that week. We, of course, told her about what we found, but she insisted he'd already told her everything and had taken care of it. We forwarded the info to her roommate, who showed it to her, but she still wouldn't listen. She was convinced they were in love and everything would work out. We decided to send in an anonymous tip, and he was arrested the next day at her apartment. That's when my daughter found out he'd been lying about almost everything. He had involved her in a business he was trying to start, which mostly meant she was financing things for him since his credit was shot from bounce checks and theft. She's still working to untangle herself from all of that. He's still in jail, and according to her lawyer, he'll likely stay there for at least 2 years, depending on how things go in 2 other counties. When I was in university, I was walking home from the bars in the Bywood Market in Ottawa with my roommate at the time. It was around 2:30 a.m., and we were looking forward to getting home and ordering some pizza when we came across 2 guys and a very drunk girl. At first, we didn't think much of it. Seeing people out late like that was pretty common on a Friday night. But as we walked behind them for a few minutes, we started to notice how out of it she was. One of the guys was basically carrying her, and her clutch was just hanging limply from her wrist. Our street was coming up, but instead of turning down it, we decided to hang back and see what was going on. The guys explained that she was one of their girlfriends who'd had too much to drink, and they were taking her home. We asked a few more questions: what bar they were at, where she lived, if she was an Ottawa U student, etc. They gave answers that sounded convincing, but seemed uncomfortable and kept trying to get us to leave. During the conversation, the guy holding her shifted her position to get a better grip, which made her arm drop and her clutch fall. Before they could move, my roommate grabbed it and checked her ID. My roommate then asked the guys if they knew her first and last name, along with her birthday. That's when everything changed. The other guy got aggressive and confrontational, while the first one went silent. They didn't know her name or birthday. At that point, I pulled out my phone and called the police. The guy dropped her and they took off running. We stayed with her for about 10 minutes until the police and EMS arrived. We gave statements, but we didn't have much to go on beyond their descriptions. The police told us they suspected she'd been drugged and said she was lucky we happened to be walking behind her. It was a pretty scary experience. Update: thanks for all the kind words and my first ever gold. It was definitely a surreal experience, but I'd like to think most people would have done the same. I was up in a dead box elder tree, also known as an ash maple, about 60 feet up, cutting it down. It was wedged between 2 houses, so both neighbors were splitting the bill and watching me from the yard. The wind was high, and I was moving around a lot in the canopy. The tree was swaying so much it felt like I might lose my lunch, but I've been through worse. Still, something fell off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was tipping me off subconsciously. Maybe it was the sound of the wood creaking in a way that didn't seem right. Maybe it was the noise my spurs made as I climbed. The tree itself felt solid, though. I didn't hit any mushy spots on the way up. The plan was to top it out, slide down the main stem, rig the limbs down, and then drop the pole neatly to the ground. Everything seemed routine, but for some reason, I kept getting goosebumps. It was like that physical fear that makes you question your bladder every few seconds. I didn't have any concrete reason to be scared, but there it was, that gut feeling I couldn't ignore. I've learned the hard way not to disregard my gut instinct, so I went on high alert. It felt almost superstitious at this point, but I wasn't about to take any chances. I unhooked my lanyards and came down, telling myself it was probably time for lunch anyway, though it was only 9 a.m. I made an excuse, packed up my truck, and headed home. Later, I called my old mentor. His wife had just had a baby. We talked about that for a while, and then he started talking about his younger brother, who had been born premature, and the concerns they had about it. Then he veered off into a tangent about a time his brother broke his back when a Douglas fir decided to barber chair on him while he was about 20 feet up. Neither of them saw it coming, but the crane operator acted fast and saved his life. I ate, showered, and after a few hours of avoiding it, I finally went back. I cut all the limbs, took the top off the tree, but that nagging feeling of the barber chair still stuck with me. I couldn't shake it, so I decided to go the extra mile. I used my strongest rigging rope, a 5/8 THS line that holds over 26,000 pounds, to marl the base of the trunk up to about 30 feet. It was a total waste of time, but once a quote is accepted, I'm not working by the hour, so who cares, right? Sure enough, when we started bringing the pole down, it splintered and popped open like it was only being held together by spit and chewing gum. If we hadn't reinforced it like we did, with serious mummy wrapping, it would have injured either me or my groundsman and caused massive damage to the clients' homes. Tens of thousands of dollars worth, easily. I wish I could say I learned something about tree assessment from that, but honestly, I didn't. It just added one more reason why I trust my gut, no matter what. The way our brains process information is mostly subconscious, and there's no way for us to consciously catch every little detail without turning ourselves into something like autistic savants. So the best thing we can do is not ignore that instinct. Christmas 2006. My girlfriend and I were out Christmas shopping, and I was set on getting my father a watch. He hadn't had one in a while, and I thought it would be a perfect gift. We went to every single store in the mall, but I just couldn't find the right one. Hours passed, and I walked out empty-handed. It was about a 45-minute drive home, and my girlfriend was getting frustrated with me. She asked why I couldn't pick one. What was going on? I pulled over to the side of the road, unable to hold it together anymore, and started crying. I didn't know how to explain it. I told her I didn't understand why I couldn't pick a watch, but I had this overwhelming feeling that my dad wouldn't be around long enough to even use it. Why buy a watch if he didn't have much time left? Eventually, we did find one, and we had a wonderful Christmas. But in the last week of March, just 3 months later, my dad got sick. It turned out to be an MRSA infection, and he passed away on March 31st. I walked into his hospital room after the doctors had failed to revive him, knowing I was there to say goodbye. His watch was sitting on the windowsill, and as I walked out, I grabbed it. In the hallway, it hit me, that feeling from Christmas, that strange premonition, and I realized it had been right all along. In 2005, my mom had planned to take my sister and me to the Natural History Museum since we lived just outside London and it was only a short tube right away. But on the day we were supposed to go, she had this awful feeling, so we decided to stay home and watch movies instead. That turned out to be the day of the July 7th bombings. It was late 2012 at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar when a sandstorm rolled in, dark and ominous, sweeping across the base. I was driving a K-loader down the runway, my goggles on, sand whipping through the air, when I glanced over at the new aircraft hangars under construction. Through the gritty haze, I thought I saw one of them sway just a little. But with all the sand and the chaos of the storm, I figured I was imagining things and pushed it out of my mind. I had more important things to focus on. The next day, when I caught my ride to the airfield, I saw it for real. The massive steel frame they'd been building for months had collapsed overnight. It was just a huge pile of twisted steel beams and sand. When my husband called to tell me that my sister-in-law's breast cancer had come back, I was overwhelmed. The first time she was diagnosed, I remained calm and hopeful. She underwent treatment and went into remission. But when I got the second call, 3 years later, I had my first full-blown panic attack. Everyone else in the family stayed positive, but just a year later, she passed away. I was playing basketball and landed badly on my leg. I couldn't walk and had to be carried off. I told my mom, "Mom, something's wrong. Take me to the hospital." She said, "No, you're fine, it just needs time." A week went by before she finally took me to the hospital. Turns out, I had a broken tibia. Jesus, Mom, come on. One time, my sister called me downstairs to talk to my dad on the phone. At the time, that was pretty normal, maybe once a week, and there was nothing unusual about the timing or anything. But when I picked up the phone, my stomach dropped. I felt like I was going to be sick, and I really didn't want to answer. It turned out my grandfather, whom I was very close to, had passed away unexpectedly. To this day, I still don't understand what it was. I hadn't gotten any clues from my family's reactions. They weren't even the ones to tell me first because he wanted to tell me himself. And all of this started before I even saw any of them. There had been no news, medical or otherwise, about my grandfather before that moment. It was near Halloween, and my friends and I were swapping ghost stories. One of my friends said she was going to share a story about her parents' first date. She mentioned she didn't like telling it because it was true, but we insisted, so she went ahead. To sum it up, her parents had just finished a nice, though somewhat awkward, first date. As the evening was wrapping up, my friend's dad suggested they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He was familiar with the area from his rock climbing adventures, so they drove to the mouth of the canyon, got out of the car, and started hiking. The only light came from the stars, since it was a new moon. As they walked, my friend's dad started feeling uneasy. The path ahead, which led under some trees, was getting darker, and it was growing late. He brushed off the feeling and kept going. My friend later told us that she had felt the same unease at almost the exact same time, though she didn't know the trail as well as he did. A minute later, the feeling came back stronger for him. He ignored it again and continued, but as they walked deeper into the trees, his foot bumped into something soft in the middle of the path. It was too dark to see what it was, and the bad feeling intensified. Instead of checking it out, both of them agreed it was time to leave and hurried back. Years later, after they were married, they were watching an interview with Ted Bundy. The interviewer asked him to describe the time he felt closest to being caught, and Bundy recalled a night when he lured a girl into Provo Canyon. He had just killed her when he heard some people coming up the trail. He hid in the trees, and just as he watched a man walk into the body, the man turned around and walked away without a second glance. Turns out that soft thing in the path all those years ago had been Bundy's victim. I had this overwhelming feeling of dread as I watched my twin sister walk down the driveway to get in the car and visit her boyfriend in the next town over. Deep down, I just knew she shouldn't go. It was storming heavily, and my mom even insisted she try to make it home before the weather got worse. She tried, but in the middle of the night, she lost control on the icy turnpike and veered off the road. Miraculously, she was completely fine. Now she believes me about my spidey sense and admits I was right all along. Back in high school, my friends and I went to what should have been a typical weekend party. But the second we walked in, my gut screamed at me to leave. There was something wrong, an unsettling energy in the air that I couldn't quite explain. I kept pestering my friends. We need to go. Now. Something's not right here. When they hesitated, I made an offer they couldn't refuse. I'll buy everyone steak and shake if we leave right this minute. The promise of greasy burgers and milkshakes finally convinced them. We left just in time. The next morning, we learned the chilling truth. Police had raided the party just 15 minutes after we left. Most of the kids got arrested, but worse, officers had interrupted a group of guys sexually assaulting a passed-out drunk girl. That free steak and shake was the best money I ever spent. To this day, I've never ignored that gut feeling again. A few years ago, I started experiencing a stomach ache. I don't usually get them, so it felt a bit off. When the pain shifted to my side, I started to get really worried, so I called my doctor. He scheduled me for an emergency appointment, and I thought it could be appendicitis, which he agreed with. I went to the appointment, was poked and prodded, and the doctor told me there was nothing seriously wrong. He said, if it were your appendix, you wouldn't be able to sit there and talk to me. Fair enough, so I left and went home. That night, things took a turn for the worse. I started vomiting, and I knew something was seriously wrong. I ended up at the hospital where the doctor, who was pretty rude, honestly, examined me again and said it was probably just a stomach bug or maybe a urinary tract infection. She told me to drink flat Coke, which was ridiculous, and see my doctor the next morning. At that point, I was so pale I looked gray, and I could barely keep down any water. The next morning, still feeling awful, I had my partner take me to my doctor again. After more prodding, the doctor suggested it might be an infection, but refer me to the hospital just in case. At the hospital, they ran a bunch of tests, but no one seemed convinced it was appendicitis. By this point, I was sure it was. Finally, they agreed to do an appendectomy using keyhole surgery. I was told the surgery would take about an hour, but to expect that they might not find anything and I could wake up without an appendix. 6 hours later, I woke up with a 4-inch incision on my side and a tube sticking out of it. Definitely not the 3 small incisions I was expecting. I asked the nurse what had happened, and she said, "Oh, your appendix was really bad. I think it burst while they were removing it." So, not only did I have appendicitis like I suspected, but it had been so severe that I ended up in the hospital for another week, being treated for sepsis. While I was working on my PhD, I got an incredible opportunity to attend the Central European University Summer School program. The course was going to be really valuable for my work, and to top it off, I was offered a full scholarship with free accommodation. It was an amazing deal, one of those chances that doesn't come around often. 2 weeks before I was set to leave, I told my boyfriend at the time, "Something is telling me I shouldn't go." I was completely thrown off because, logically, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But that nagging feeling to stay kept getting stronger. Eventually, I decided to withdraw from the course, even though I felt like I was making a huge mistake. The day after I was supposed to leave, my mom, who had been perfectly healthy, suddenly got sick. A week later, she was in a coma, and another week after that, we had to make the decision to turn off life support. Her funeral followed just a week later. If I'd gone, I would have missed all of this, her last waking moments. I woke up to a strange noise. Curious, I glanced out my bedroom window, trying to figure out where it was coming from. That's when I saw my oldest cat sitting on the windowsill outside the other bedroom. She was staring into the room with a look of pure unease, as if something in there was wrong, yet she couldn't look away. At that moment, I knew something or someone was in the other room. Then, I heard the noise again. It was a soft squeaking, like someone shifting their weight from one foot to another on a wooden floor. The thing is, I don't have wooden floors. I tried to reason with myself. There couldn't be an intruder in there. It didn't make sense that someone could get in without waking me up. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and decided to check it out. As I reached the doorway, I saw 2 of my other cats in the hallway, staring anxiously into the room, clearly agitated. I peeked around the corner, and heard the squeak again. It turned out to be one of my neighbor's cats, frightened and trapped on my desk, surrounded by my own cats. I'm a registered nurse, and one of the first things they drill into us in nursing school is to trust our instincts. If something doesn't seem right, we're encouraged to call a rapid response team. This is the group that steps in when a patient's condition takes a sudden, serious turn for the worse. I landed my first job right after graduating in a department that cares for mothers and babies right after delivery. I was just 22, didn't have kids of my own, and had only spent about 6 months working with newborns at that point. One day, I had a patient with her baby who appeared to be doing well. The baby's weight, vital signs, and intake/output were all within the normal range, but something didn't sit right with me. For one, I had never heard this baby cry. Anyone who's ever been around newborns knows that they cry for pretty much any reason, all the time. But this baby didn't cry when I weighed her. Newborns usually wail like they're being tortured, or when I prick her heel for a blood sugar test. I felt a bit silly given my lack of experience with newborns, but something told me I needed to speak up. I took the baby to the nursery nurse, who had over 20 years of experience, and explained that I had a bad feeling. The baby appeared fine. Her vitals, including blood sugar, were normal. But the baby was unusually limp. Her arms and legs were stretched out rather than curled up like they're supposed to be. She had a weak grasp, not holding onto our fingers like a newborn should. Even when we managed to get her to cry, it was faint and weak. The nursery nurse agreed that something wasn't right, even though everything seemed technically normal. She called the neonatologist on call, spending about 20 minutes on the phone trying to explain that despite the normal numbers, the baby just didn't seem okay. Fortunately, the neonatologist trusted her judgment and had us send the baby to the NICU. That baby ended up staying in the NICU for nearly a month, where she was tube-fed because she had trouble eating. After genetic testing, they discovered she had a rare genetic disorder, one that affects only about 30,000 babies a year in the US. Normally, this disorder isn't diagnosed until a baby is about 6 months old and unable to sit up. There's no cure, but doctors were able to start treatments right away to help manage some of the symptoms. I still look back on that moment and am grateful I listened to my gut even when I felt unsure. Christmas Day, 2016. My family and I had packed up the car and were about to head to my grandparents' house for the holiday when the car refused to start. Let's rewind a bit. All day, I had this strange, dreamlike feeling. Something fell off, and the night before, I had a vivid dream. In it, we were driving across a bridge when our tire popped. We slid, and a car slammed into my side of the vehicle. The memory of the headlights coming at me is still so clear in my mind. I get these kinds of vivid, often unsettling dreams, and though I didn't think much of it, I couldn't shake the unease. Anyway, we called AAA for help. In the meantime, I was refusing to get into the car. Everything just felt wrong. When the AAA guy arrived, he told us it was the battery, so he charged it up. Even though the issue seemed fixed, I still felt off. But I got it anyway. As he was about to leave, he turned to my mom and said, "I just want to check your tire pressure for some reason." He went to check and immediately pointed out that one of the front tires was extremely overinflated. In his words, it was about to pop, especially if you were to drive on a highway or turnpike. He fixed the tire free of charge. As soon as he did, that uneasy, dreamlike feeling lifted, and I felt totally fine. We finally made it to my grandparents' house, and I enjoyed some fantastic mashed potatoes. I've learned to trust my gut. It was either October of 2013 or 2014, if I remember correctly. I was at a bar just a day before Halloween, enjoying a few drinks with some friends. At the time, I lived in a pretty rough neighborhood. Out of nowhere, I started feeling this intense sense of unease, like something wasn't right. So I decided to call a night and headed home. The next morning, my friends called me to let me know that the bar had been shot up. 3 people got injured. It had been about 2 hours after I left. A few years ago, around 1 a.m., on a Sunday morning, I needed to take my dog out before heading to bed. At the time, I lived in a rough neighborhood, and as a woman, I always kept my guard up no matter the hour. As I was about to leave my apartment building, something didn't sit right. My gut was telling me something was off. The street was completely deserted. No cars, no people, except for a van parked off to the side. There were 3 men standing outside of it. Immediately, I did what I always do in situations like this. I lower my head, pull my jacket hood up, and try to stay unnoticed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw they were struggling with something. As I looked closer, I realized 2 of the men were holding up the third as if helping him walk. I assumed they were just helping a friend who had partied too hard, and I convinced myself it was nothing to worry about, just a group of guys looking out for each other. But then they saw me. They immediately stopped and froze. That struck me as strange and more than a little unsettling. So, without thinking twice, I grabbed my dog and quickly headed back into the building, barely giving him a chance to pee. I went to bed, tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, thinking it was just my overactive imagination. But the next morning, when I went to take the dog out again, I saw a notice in the elevator asking if anyone had witnessed anything unusual the night before. It turned out a body had been found nearby. It wasn't a friend they were helping after all. They were ditching a body. I still can't shake how much it disturbs me, and I'll never ignore my intuition again. Here's a story from the late 1990s. I was boarding a TWA flight from Dallas to Denver on an MD-80 in the evening. The 2 women sitting behind me were clearly nervous about flying, which was starting to get on my nerves. So, I grabbed a book to distract myself. This was before you could use electronics during takeoff, remember? Anyway, we take off, and not long after, the plane slows down a bit. The flight attendant quickly gets up from the back and heads to the front of the plane. The women behind me immediately start panicking, saying, "That's not normal." I roll my eyes. Planes always slow down a little after takeoff, no big deal. My gut tells me everything's fine. Then, about 2 minutes later, the plane makes a sharp turn. The pilot comes on the PA, and I can feel my stomach drop. Okay, now this isn't normal. Ladies and gentlemen, we're returning to the airport. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened, the pilot says. There's a pause, then he comes back on to explain. We've lost an engine. This happens all the time. Also, you might notice a few emergency vehicles on the runway, but that's just standard procedure. As we land, I look out the window and see what looks like every single fire truck at DFW lined up along the runway. We touch down without any major issues, and people start clapping. But then the pilot gives us the real news. I've trained for this scenario many times in a simulator, but it's a once-in-a-career experience for a commercial airline pilot. So yeah, my gut was wrong. I was sure everything was fine, and there was a serious issue after all. Edit, I've been trying to find a log of this incident. It would have been around 1997, 1998, or maybe 1999. The flight was either DFW to Denver or DFW to ST. Lewis on TWA. I remember it was an evening flight because I could see the lights of the fire trucks as we made the emergency landing. One night back in college, my friends and I decided to make a booze run. We were living in Flint at the time and were hanging out at a friend's house in a pretty sketchy neighborhood. We had our one friend who was 21 go inside to grab the goods while the rest of us waited in the car. You know, the usual underage drinking routine. As we sat in the parking lot, I noticed a guy standing by the trunk of his car a few rows ahead of us. Something about him just didn't sit right, so I kept an eye on him while my friends were chatting and laughing, not paying attention. I noticed our friend who was driving was watching him too. After a moment, the guy popped his trunk, pulled out a pistol, and started walking toward us. That was enough for me. We immediately hit the gas, racing through the parking lot as our friend came out of the store. We yelled for him to get in and sped off as fast as we could. Later, we found out there had been a lot of carjackings in that area over the past few months. Definitely a close call. I was 8 years old, sitting in the back seat of the car while my dad was driving. I noticed a storm was starting to roll in, and as I looked out the window, I saw a construction crane swaying in the wind. I turned to my dad and said, "You'd better hurry. That crane looks like it might topple." Everyone in the car laughed at the silly kid. Later that evening, the whole family was watching the local news when they started the broadcast by showing footage of that same crane crashing down because of the heavy wind. Thankfully, no one had been hurt, but I couldn't help but feel a little vindicated. I was leaving a family camping trip, and something just didn't feel right as I was about to head out. I couldn't shake it, but I brushed it off. It was dark though, so I decided to drive slower than usual. I rounded a curve, and there it was, a deer just standing in the middle of the road, staring at a huge field of soybeans. Even though I was driving slower, I still didn't have enough time to stop. I hit it, wrecking my hood, busting my radiator, and cracking my windshield. This buck was massive, like really huge. If I had been driving any faster, it could have done way more damage, or worse, seriously injured or even killed me. The perks of country life. I was having lunch with a couple friends back in college. We had just grabbed our food from Chick-fil-A in the student commons when I suddenly felt this intense, prickling sensation all down my back. Without thinking, I turned to my friends and told them we needed to leave. Let's head up the concourse to my place and eat there instead. They agreed, and as we were walking out, about 9 or 10 cops walked past us, heading into the building. Turns out there had been a bomb threat, and they were starting an evacuation. Good thing we left when we did. I used to have a cat. She was a stray who came to us looking for food and affection. We'd had a few strays before, but this one was different. About a year after she first showed up, she got hit by a car. We found her, and even though we hadn't let her inside before, we brought her in to take care of her. She recovered, and you could see how grateful she was. We had her for another 4 or 5 years until last year. About a year ago, I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound outside my window. There's a big farm a little farther up the street, so trucks driving by at odd hours wasn't unusual. But that night, I had a feeling that the noise wasn't coming from a truck. I couldn't shake the feeling, and I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The first thing I did when I woke up was look outside, but there was nothing there. Still, all day, something felt off, like I was waiting for something bad to happen. That evening, when my dad got home, I asked him if he'd seen the cat. He hadn't. About an hour later, he called me and said, "I think we have a problem." In that moment, I knew. He'd found her hiding under a metal plate behind the house, trying to shield herself from the rain. She couldn't walk anymore, but she was still alive. My dad took her to the vet, where they did some tests and took pictures. Only 20 minutes later, they called him. Her spine had been severed in two, and the lower part of her body was completely damaged. There was nothing they could do. My dad kept telling me there was nothing I could have done. But I keep thinking if I'd looked harder that morning, if I'd searched better, maybe she wouldn't have spent that entire day alone in the rain. I feel so guilty for that. I always say I'm a dog person, but damn, I love that cat. I haven't really told anyone about this since it happened, and it feels good to finally share it. Also, my English isn't perfect, so please be gentle. This happened about 15 years ago. My parents were going out for a nice anniversary dinner and decided I was finally old enough to be left home alone for a few hours on a weeknight. I was almost 9, and we had a fiercely protective dog, so it all felt pretty safe. Before they left, they told me to lock the doors and call them if anything came up. I followed instructions and then immediately proceeded to live it up like a tiny rock star. I had the entire house to myself, and that meant Sailor Moon marathons and doing whatever I wanted. Life was good. About halfway through my binge-watching session, there was a knock at the front door. I was confused. It had only been a couple of hours, and they said they wouldn't be back until around 10. I figured maybe Mom forgot something again and swung by to grab it. Our front door setup was a thick, original wooden door from the 1930s with a screen door outside of it. As I got close, my dog Sadie was already freaking out. She had a tendency to overreact, so I tried to calm her down and open the main door, leaving the screen door shut. But it wasn't my mom. Standing there was a middle-aged man I'd never seen before. Sadie went absolutely wild. I kept a tight grip on her collar and asked the man what he wanted. He launched into a strange story about having twin daughters, how they'd gotten into a fight, and how one had run away. He said he thought she might be hiding in my house. Alarm bells were already ringing, but I asked him why he thought she'd be here. He said this house was where his daughter was born, that it was her safe place, and that she'd probably come back here because it was the only other place she knew. Now I was really uneasy. His story didn't make any sense. I told him this house had been in my family since it was built. My dad was literally born here. My grandparents gave it to my parents when they started a family. There were photos of my dad and uncle playing in the front yard from the 70s hanging right next to me. At this point, Sadie was growling nonstop and the man started getting more aggressive. He insisted I didn't know what I was talking about and just needed to let him look around. That's when things got real. The latch on our old screen door was busted, and I was using all my strength just to hold Sadie back. He suddenly yanked the door open and reached for me. Big mistake. Sadie lunged forward with everything she had, sunk her teeth into his hand, and did not let go. The guy screamed, tried to pull back while slamming the screen door shut to free himself. Sadie got pushed back, but she was still in full beast mode. I slammed the main door, locked it, chained it, and ran through the house, locking every door and window I could find. Then I hid in the bathroom, shaking and trying to breathe. After about 15 minutes, when Sadie finally calmed down, I peeked outside. No sign of the guy or his car. He was gone. I called my parents and told them they needed to come home right now. When they arrived, I told them everything. My dad went to inspect the front door, and sure enough, there was a streak of blood smeared on the screen door frame and siding. Sadie? She got a full steak that weekend, served on a plate like royalty. She earned it. I was about that age when this happened, maybe 8 or 9. My dad had run into a convenience store and left me waiting in the car, something that wasn't all that unusual back then. Not long after he went inside, a van pulled into the space right next to ours. I was sitting in the back seat on the side closest to them. As soon as they parked, the side door slid open. Inside were 2 men and a woman. They were all smiling way too much and waving at me like we were old friends. The woman was even holding out candy, like she was trying to lure a puppy. Even as a kid, something about it felt wrong. I didn't know them, and yet they seemed thrilled to see me. It didn't make sense, and that's when my mom's warning came rushing back. Earlier that year, a boy about my age had been abducted after his Little League game. It made national news. I remember my mom making me sit down and watch the newscast with her. She was serious, told me never to talk to strangers, never to go with anyone, no matter what they said or offered. I didn't say a word. I just quietly slid down off the seat and lay flat on the floor of the back seat, staying out of sight until my dad came back. I never told him what happened. Never told anyone, actually, not until much later. Looking back, I honestly don't know what would have happened if my mom hadn't made me watch that news story. That moment stuck with me, and it might have saved me. I work in the oil and gas industry here in the US, and one of the most important concepts we emphasize is stop work authority. It's taken extremely seriously. Everyone, regardless of their position, has the power to shut down operations at any time if they believe something isn't safe. When I run contractor orientations before they begin work at my station, I make sure this point is crystal clear. I tell them, you can stop work for any reason, at any time, without fear of consequences. We'll pause, assess the situation, and make sure it's safe to continue. I even joke, if you say we need to stop because home faster's face makes you uneasy, we'll stop work, talk through why my face isn't a safety hazard, and then resume. That always gets a laugh, but the message sticks. Safety comes first, always. At the end of the day, no job, no deadline, and no budget is worth a life. If we can't do the work safely, then it's not work worth doing. I live next to a 24-hour grocery store that's isolated in a big parking lot. To get to the front entrance, I usually walk up a side alley and turn left. One night around 5 a.m., I headed over to grab something from the store. When I came back out, I noticed an old man sitting at the bus stop right next to the alley I had just walked through. For some reason, I felt immediately uneasy and didn't want to walk past him. So I turned around and went back into the store, thinking I'd just wait it out for a moment. I stood there for about 10 minutes, trying to shake the feeling before deciding I was being ridiculous and walked back outside. The man was gone, but I still felt off. That's when it hit me. There's no bus that runs for another 2 hours, and he hadn't gone into the store. I couldn't think of any reason he would have been there. My gut told me that man had been waiting for me. Even though he was gone, I knew I couldn't walk back the way I came. Instead, I took the long route, heading up a hill before crossing over to the other side. When I looked down into the alley I would have walked through, I saw him. He was leaning against the wall, hiding, waiting for me. From that day on, I only go to that store during the daylight. A year ago, my elderly uncle didn't show up for work. He had a history of being unreliable, usually because of drinking, so at first I assumed he'd gotten drunk and forgotten. But something in my gut told me to check on him anyway. When I got to his apartment building, the staff refused to let me in. Frustrated, I asked them to knock on his door, but there was no answer. "He's not home," they said, brushing me off. I couldn't just walk away, but what could I do? Call the police for a wellness check. It felt dramatic. Maybe he was just passed out at a friend's place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Instead of giving up, I decided to look for his car. I searched 3 different parking lots, each 4 or 5 stories high, but no sign of it. I combed the nearby streets and finally spotted his vehicle parked blocks away. Now I knew something wasn't right. I rushed back to the building and demanded they open his door. His car was here. He had to be inside. I refused to leave until they either let me in or called the police. After arguing, I dragged the maintenance guy, the property manager, and even a social worker upstairs. They knocked again. Nothing. Reluctantly, the maintenance man unlocked the door, and there stood my uncle and his tidy witties, blinking at us like we'd lost our minds. Everyone glared at me, annoyed at the false alarm. But as they stormed off, I stayed. Something still fell off. We started talking, but his words were slurred, his speech slow and garbled. At first, I thought he was just groggy, but after 5 minutes of struggling to understand him, I insisted he go to the hospital. He resisted, but finally agreed. The moment we walked into the ER, everything changed. Doctors rushed him back, surrounding him with machines and monitors. The diagnosis? A severe stroke. He'd been unconscious for over 12 hours before I found him. The doctor said if I hadn't pushed, if I'd listened to everyone telling me I was overreacting, he might not have made it. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.